This video has been brought to you by MSI, and specifically their Z270 range of motherboards. Links to their website and Facebook page can be found in the description. So in the last few years, it's become apparent that top tier motherboards not only need to have the specs and features that you need, but also to look great. So today, we're going to take a look at a board from MSI, which I think is not only one of the best boards they've designed, but probably one of the best looking boards that I've ever seen.
Find your way back home.
So here we have the MSI Z270 Gaming M7. This is one of MSI's best motherboards, sitting only below their two titanium branded boards in the product lineup. It retails for $395 Australian or $220 US and is protected by a 3-year warranty. You'd have probably guessed that the Gaming M7 features Intel's Z270 chipset, which is critical for overclocking, and it supports both the 6th and 7th gen i3, i5 and i7 chips, as well as the Pentium and Celeron socket 1151 processors. The VRM on the Gaming M7 features a 10+1 power phase design and is kept cool by these two reasonably large heatsinks, above which are some nicely designed shrouds and LED lighting, but we'll get more into that later. The Gaming M7 has 4 DIMM slots which support a maximum of 64GB of DDR4 memory. It also has support for Intel XMP memory profiles up to a staggering 4133 MHz. If we move a little lower down the board, we can see the very nicely designed and LED backlit chipset heatsink. Now, I love how this looks, but it's just a shame that it'll end up mostly covered once you install your graphics card. As far as the SATA support goes, we've got 6 SATA 6GB/s connections and a single U.2 connection, which I think they probably could have done without in favour of some more SATA connections, because I think going forward they're going to be more handy than the U.2 will be. There are 3 M.2 connections on the M7. The bottom 2 can support drives up to 80mm in length, with the top one supporting drives up to 110mm. The second slot also includes an attractive cover, which MSI call their M2 Shield, which supposedly helps reduce heat buildup on the drive itself because it has a thermal pad underneath and makes direct contact with the drive. Regardless of whether or not that actually works, it's still a nice way to cleanly hide your most likely unattractive M2 drive, unless you went all out and bought a 960 Pro or something like that and want to show it off. Something worth noting here is the M2 Shield is removable, but then it's not able to be fitted to the top or bottom slots because of the existing armor around the connections. I'd have liked to put the Shield on the top cover just for looks rather than having on my 960 Evo, which in the normal case wouldn't be visible anyway underneath the graphics card. There are 6 PCI slots on the M7 which support both 2-way SLI and 3-way Crossfire, and 3 of the slots are reinforced. If you run a single GPU in the top slot, it'll run at 16x, but if you run the SLI or Crossfire, they both run at 8x, 8x. On the western side of 5 of the slots, there's also an LED lit shroud, which not only looks great, but it covers up the circuitry of the onboard sound. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Now, MSI referred to the audio on the Gaming M7 as their Audio Boost Pro 4. And it's based on the Realtek ALC 1220 codecs with Nishikon Gold Series audio capacitors. In fact, the M7 has 2 Realtek ALC 1220s and each has their own integrated amplifier. But why do they put 2 on there? Well, because that way they can have one for the rear output and one for the front panel audio. So if you choose to run the front panel audio connections, you're not missing out on anything at all, which is a really nice touch, MSI. Alright, let's jump up and take a look at the rear I/O then. But first I just want to make mention of the nice I/O plate they include, which has all the connections clearly labelled, and the plate itself feels of very high quality and is even slightly padded. Okay, so what we've got here from left to right are a PS2 port, 2 USB 2 ports, a clear CMOS button, another vertical USB 2 port, which is the one you'd use for the BIOS flashback function. We've got a display port and a HDMI connection, a gigabit LAN port, 2 USB 3.1 Gen 1 ports, a USB 3.1 Gen 2, a USB Type-C, as well as your digital and analog audio ports. So all in all, a pretty comprehensive rear I/O. So with the major stuff out of the way, let's take a closer look around the board to see what else is here. Starting at the top left and working our way around, we've got the CPU power input, which this board features an 8+4 pin connection, but you get away with just running the single 8, that's fine. The CPU fan and pump fan connections are also here, and thankfully MSI have included a debug LED which can help diagnose boot issues. Swinging around to the right hand side, we can see we've got another fan header, also a low temperature boot jumper for those of you crazy enough to put it under liquid nitrogen. There's also some voltage read points here as well, which could come in handy in that scenario. Below that is the 24 pin and the first of two USB 3 headers. This one being angled, which is nice, but wouldn't have been nice to see the 24 pin angled as well, just purely for symmetry. Underneath that, there's a USB 3.1 header if your particular case has a USB Type-C front panel connection, and the BIOS flashback button is here as well. Now, we've spoken about the SATA ports, so we'll skip that and swing down along the bottom where you'll find the MSI Game Boost knob. Now, this is interesting. With this dial, you can select between 7 preset OC profiles, and for clarity, I'll put the table on screen now. I'll be dialing in my overclock manually because I know exactly what to expect of my chip, but I'll see how well these preset profiles go as well, so stay tuned for that. Beside that, we've got the onboard reset and power buttons, which are extremely handy for people like myself who'll be mounting it on a test bench with no physical case buttons. And beside that, the front panel connections and the second front panel USB 3 header. Next, we've got the two USB 2 connections for your front panel or internal devices and another fan header. Along further, we've got an RGB LED header, so if you wanted to control and sync your case lighting with the motherboard lighting, you can do that. The sixth and final fan header is also here, and of course the front panel audio connections. So all in all, MSI have managed to squeeze a hell of a lot of features, functionality and connections on this board. The unboxing experience with the Z270 Gaming M7 was really nice. First of all, it comes in a very striking box, which is nice enough to leave on display if you're that sort of person. The board is sitting on top. When you lift that out, all your cables and documentation are underneath. So you've got plenty of SATA cables, you've got an RGB header cable, an SLI bridge, you've also got a front panel connection aid, which will make it life easier when you go to connect those. You've also got a driver CD, the I/O plate, some warranty information, and also some cable cards. And of course, the all-important case badge. You also get a manual, which happens to be one of the best manuals I've seen included in any motherboard. Nicely laid out, clearly labeled, and has nice diagrams. Alright, so that's the physical tour of the board. Let's throw it on the test bench, get it built, and fire it up. Alright, so before we do anything else, let's take a quick look at the BIOS. So MSI call their UEFI BIOS Click BIOS 5, and it hasn't changed much over the last few years. And in my opinion, it hasn't really needed to. It's a very well thought through and laid out BIOS. There's two major realms here. Basically, we've got the easy mode, which is a single page with large icons, easy to understand terminology, and with all the basic information adjustments that you need to make, like the CPU speed, DDR speed, some general information up here like the DDR voltage, core voltage, how much RAM you've got, all that kind of basic stuff. The BIOS build date as well. And actually one thing I'll mention too is before I did this part of the video, I updated the BIOS to the latest one because specifically it addressed some issues relating to the Samsung 960 EVOs, which is what I've got in here. So I felt like it was important to do that. So you can see here how easy mode looks. You've got some basic options down the side here. Storage info, memory info, fan info, all that kind of stuff. And some on and off switches, this kind of stuff down here as well. But let's just jump into advanced mode and I'll show you a bit more around it. So here we are in the advanced tab of the BIOS, and I'm going to be up front here. This isn't going to be a super in-depth BIOS tour because that would take about 30 minutes by itself. But it will cover the basic areas you'll need to pay attention to if you plan to overclock. So you can see in the advanced mode here, the top part of the screen is the same as it was in easy mode, but you get more options down below, and these are pretty self-explanatory. The one thing we're going to focus on here is the overclocking settings. So if you dial in, or if you're going to dial in a manual overclock, you need to pay attention to what I'm going to do here. So what we need to do is go into the OC tab, and we'll see a whole bunch of options here, and each of these options expand to create more options. So it can be a bit of a rabbit hole and it can be a bit confusing to figure your way around. So let's just keep it simple. We've got the CPU ratio here. This is where you can set the desired max core clock. So we're going to go here and dial it into 50. just skip that. All right, so 5 gigahertz, that's where we want it to be. The DRAM setting is down a little bit further. So what we're going to do is we're going to enable the XMP profile, which will enable that RAM to run at its rated speed. Also down a little bit more, we want to change the core voltage from being auto to, where are we? We want to change it to manual. So we're going to go 1.35 volts, 1.35, if I can type properly. Now what we want to do as well is, we won't do it just now, but I will come back and look in the CPU load line calibration. What this is going to depend on the V droop, or the amount of voltage that gets applied more or less when it's under load. So what you want to do is you want to keep that stable and static. You don't want the CPU voltage to change up and down as you're overclocking. That's going to cause instability. So I'm not sure how this board's going to react to that just yet, so I'm just going to leave it on auto for the moment and then keep an eye on how it's going. Now we'll just go back one here. So there's literally hundreds of other settings to play about in here, but if you're just going to, muck around and get a basic overclock, you really only need to worry about the CPU frequency, enabling your XMP, and mucking about with the CPU core voltage. That's really going to give you a basic manual overclock. Now, like I said before, it'll depend how far down the rabbit hole you want to go, and if you decide to grab a gaming M7 motherboard, you're more than welcome to, but for the purpose of a quick look and not putting you all to sleep, we'll save these settings and we'll boot into Windows, just so we know that it's an extremely easy to navigate BIOS with comprehensive customizability, and you have no issues at all finding your way around if you want to delve into it much deeper than I have. As we briefly touched on when we looked at the BIOS, I was working on dialing in my overclock on my 7700K. Now I had a bit of a head start here because I know what this chip is capable of in another board, and the gaming M7 responded to overclocking as well as my Maximus 8 formula did. Now the voltage required to keep my chip stable at 5 GHz was 1.372 volts, which is slightly less than my formula needed, which needed 1.382, so I guess that's a bit of a bonus. I did have to tweak the load line calibration though, as I thought I might when we were talking about the BIOS setting, because when it was left on auto, it would run 1.392 volts through the CPU, which is not dangerous, but it's more than it needs. I did have a bit of a play around with the MSI Game Boost overclocking function, and that seemed to work okay. It did overvolt a little more than I would have liked, not dangerous amounts, but I guess that's to account for different chips in the silicon lottery. I guess that's to guarantee that most chips will run at the presets on the board. Now, I preferred to dial in my own overclock, but for those of you who don't want to do that, it's a solid and well implemented option. Just don't turn the dial to 11, both figuratively and literally, because that'll push 1.5 volts through the CPU. Psst, MSI, that's probably a bit too much. Let's have a look at the LED effects then. So most of you will be pretty happy to know that the board has customizable LED lighting, and in order to control that you need to download and install the MSI gaming app, which can be found on the driver's CD or on the web page. Now when you launch it and find your way to the LED area, you might be a little bit underwhelmed by your options here. It's not fully customizable and your choices are limited to just 7 colors and 5 effects. The entire LED around the board is also treated just as a single zone, so you can't have independent zone lighting. The other motherboard I had on my test bench before this was the MSI X99A Gaming Carbon Pro, and the LED implementation on that board was amazing, and I'm not sure if the LED lighting range or functionality can be tweaked on the Z270 with new software or an update, but if at all possible, I think they should probably consider it. The onboard audio was very good. I tested it using my Denon D2000s in-game, listening to music and watching something loud and obnoxious like Transformers, and to be honest, it was probably a touch quieter than I'd like. I know what these headphones are capable of, and the onboard audio was almost there. Having said that, unless you're a hardcore audiophile, the onboard audio solution will be all you need. I find the onboard audio of my Maximus 8 formula to be a bit better, but in saying that, at the time, that board was $240 more than the M7 currently retails for. So here's where I'd usually summarize my thoughts, but being a longer video, I tried to kind of tick it off as we went. So this is going to be my summary. Basically, if you're after a top-end Z270 board with loads of connectivity, great features, good onboard audio, nice overclocking, and great looks, then you need to really consider the Z270 Gaming M7. If only it had onboard Wi-Fi, that'd make it a complete no-brainer. So thanks to MSI for sending the board over to me for a review. It actually was my first motherboard review on the channel, so I was really excited about it. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, give it a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, because next week there's going to be a really fun video and you won't want to miss it. I'm going to be taking a look at a Titan X and doing something really fun with it. So make sure you stick around for that, and I'll see you then.